So I'm very pleased on behalf of the Chattanooga Film Festival to welcome the creative team behind the film you've just watched, Ganymede, which is singular. Like during the programming process, like there was a text chain going back and forth, just like, I've never seen anything quite like that. And it was like, neither have I. So we were just sort of like, well, that's the key. That's the kind of film that we aim to like present here. And let me give you all a chance to introduce yourselves before I get going on my questions, because that's gotta have questions. But yes, please do say hi to the lovely folks at home.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the kind words, Jason. We're thrilled and appreciative of Chattanooga being so excited about it. I'm Sam. I'm a co-director of Ganymede, and Colby is here. He's the co-director and writer.
Hi, yes, Colby, and I want to say thanks to all of you who've just watched this film too. There's so many things you can choose to watch at this festival and beyond, so it means a lot that you chose Ganymede to watch.
All right, so let's get started. First off, and I'm going to start with you, Colby, because as the writer, what sort of religious tradition helped shape your young mind? Because I find there's a specificity to every portrayal of like a fundamentalist youth. So I'm interested in what shaped that.
What's kind of interesting about it is I was lucky enough to dodge this kind of experience because it exists one generation removed from me and my family. So not necessarily with the queer aspect, but with the religious trauma aspect and the kind of very non-denominational kind of fire and brimstone approach. My father grew up in a church like that, and so that comes from a very real place. I would go to it sometimes with my grandparents. And so when I was writing those scenes, I was kind of thinking back, like, what did that sound like? What is the kind of intonation and the vibe that you're getting from these type of fundamentalist preachers? And so I kind of brought that experience into it. And it was kind of interesting because my dad was actually able to be there to film that scene. And he was like, this was totally weird and creepy because he was like, I felt like I was like back in church. It was like, it affected him a little bit. So I knew we did our job and David did his. So
That's fascinating. And all great horror is purgative at some extent. It's an exorcism. So like just sort of like working counter to like the way that evangelicals like to portray things. I also, and I'm. My questions are script heavy at the beginning, and I'm sorry for that, but that's just the way that my mind works. When you were breaking the beats of this story, were there points when you were when you sort of realized that there were whole tropes for like the searing coming out story that you could pillage and sort of like because it's weird. It's like for the longest time, indie cinema, like it had like this was the kind of coming out story you're telling, and like these not that like someone could do a not another coming out movie, but you could. And I sensed in this a sense of like there are moments that you can explore from different perspectives, and I was just sort of interested in how that that was sort of was part of your process, and then also. Were there moments when you were sort of experimenting with like bringing in more or less horror elements?
Sure. Well, it's interesting. I think the question that this film kind of like generated from, or at least the script version of the film generated from, is like, what would it be like if you perceived your own homosexuality or queerness as an evil entity that was like afflicting you and your family, kind of being born out of this idea that, and the script was written in 2019, just the way that the rhetoric around our community, the queer community, is escalating. Some of it is taking on a really extreme, sometimes religious tone around, you hear the word demonic thrown around in the same sentence as gay or trans or queer. And so the idea that that is seeping into our culture, and how does it seep into a mind where it's being framed like that within your home? And what is the effect of that? What would that do to somebody? And so I think it's about, it's a coming out story, but like the horror of it truly is, what if it's framed as a horror in your own mind, like in your real life? And so that's kind of what I think the genesis of it was.
Yeah, it's at times it feels very much like it's aiming for the vibe of those. I was a teenage werewolf. They're like the id within, like, threatening to emerge. There's a great Mississippi made film called The Beast Within from 1982. It's kind of rapey, but it does that very well. And I have to ask you, Sam, because I've delved too far in this. How do you approach scenes like this, which could easily veer into parody, or just like, playing with people's expectations or stuff? Like, when you're doing, like, okay, we have to present this, this dark family dinner when everyone is at different odds, and there's such tremendous sadness within them, and nobody's really talking to each other. How do you get it to where you can stage that in a way that is, because you do an incredible job with your performers in this film. It's just like there's a sense of control that it never. I'm getting ahead of my words here. Sorry, but it never feels like the film is going to sort of like go over the edges. Like, you've got a very specific focus. And how do you discuss that with your actors in the beginning, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, that nobody's trying to go for, like, the campy approach, and nobody's trying to go for the searing drama?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's fantastic perspective and question. I feel like our film really went first and foremost at the truth being scary on and of itself, and everyone committing to that reality as much as possible. And Colby worked mostly with the actors, and I worked mostly with the camera work when we had to split teams throughout the directing process. So approaching the cinematography, I often was trying to approach it as this has to be as cinematic as possible. And we had an incredibly talented cinematographer named Oscar Partridge, who really took this type of story that is a Southern Gothic and really delved deep into it. He wanted to make sure we had the colors very much a specific way, the way that everything was lit to be very moody and atmospheric. And setting the stage where everything was established with full seriousness, I think allowed things that are ridiculous in any way, shape, or form to just flow naturally in their own way, but be only perceived as such by the audience and not the people existing in that reality. And I think that was a really helpful assignment that Colby often provided the actors throughout the entire process too, was saying, this is your reality. This is what you are absorbing. The subject matter can be easy if taken by the wrong actor into a different direction, but we really delicately chose who we were casting for this and the type of people. And we really lucked out with an incredible cast and a wonderful casting director named Matthew Glasner, who did a fantastic job at creating this cast for us. So we just have been really blessed to have people who are really serious with their craft throughout each step.
Yeah, because, I think to answer part of your question of like, how do we not go over that line? I think so much of it is in casting too. It's like, you got to find the right actor who's understanding the tone of it. Because you do see some performers with the material and you're like, okay, they took it in the direction you're suggesting, which is super campy. And the idea is that the actors need to be treating these lines with sincerity. It's like they need to be believing it. And if you wink at the audience at all in terms of this, it's gonna fall apart. Yeah. It's one of those things that you can't. It's not really a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's more of a, you got to play this straight if it's gonna work.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons why Pete is so amazing in it, because also, here's a question that I'm going to come back to. How'd you get Pete for this film? Because he's incredible in it, and he comes up and he like hits that exact. He's such an incredible performer.
Yeah.
And when I first saw this, I was just like, holy fuck. But I wanted to jump back to what you were saying about working with your cinematographer and talking about like keeping things cinematic, because most of the time, scope is just a choice. They're just like, oh, we want a wider aspect ratio stuff. But this actually, it feels like a film that was made before home video. Like it uses the CinemaScope frame in a way that like you don't see a lot in modern films. Like a lot of times it's just like, oh, well, just mat it off and whatever. But this feels like it was actually thought through using this sort of a panorama. And I wanted to ask about that real quick. And then we're going to circle back around to Pete, because how can you not?
Yeah, we love Pete. Absolutely. It's funny because with the cinematography, Oscar, our DP, he just was so specific about world building. That was the often term he used the most. And for him, world building was all about making sure we see this environment, especially as people who are in the Southern Gothic. He wanted to make sure location was full forefront in every single scene as well. And so there was often a part of it for him that was important about having these very specific, like full image. Like we go into every scene with a wide shot that gives you such a very specific tone, and he really likes to give it this entire very specific setting and look. And there was a word he used to always say.
Tableau.
Tableau. I knew that. I'm glad that you knew what I was trying to think of. Tableau was this term he kept saying for it. And so, yeah, he just really wanted to create this type of almost portrait for everything. And I think he did a fantastic job at doing that. And I think that mixed with certain actors doing their thing in that space was really incredible. And that's why Pete Zayas is just one of our favorite actors by far that we ever work with. And in this film, just is so specific and just talented. And Colby, actually, I believe you met Pete when we lived in LA. Is that right?
Yeah, we met Pete. We had seen him out and about a little bit, but I had him in our first film, and I just approached him and was like, "Hey, would you be in our film?" Which was Pig Hag. And then so when this one was coming up, and to answer your question about like how Pete was so natural at this delivery, is I wrote it with him in mind.
Yeah.
You know, I know Pete's voice. And so I was like, let me just write something I know that he's going to nail. And so from the very beginning of that character being written, I knew that it was going to be Pete. And so, yeah, I completely agree. It's one of my absolute favorite moments in the film.
Yeah, he cracks us up at every single instance and moment that we ever work with him. He just is. And that's often how he is also in real life, too, without the dead makeup and stuff.
Yeah.
Alrighty. So since we're talking about like Pete, let's also talk about David Koechner for a second, because I mean, like, he's a comedy icon. He's done just about everything, but thankfully, because of that, like, truly gratuitous and grotesque asphalt death in the Final Destination film he did, we know he's down for horror. So how did you reach out to him and just be like, we want you to play an evangelical sex predator?
Well, part of this is the genius of Matthew Glasner, our casting director. Floated David's name in the first place. I mean, we've always been fans of David. One of the great things, I mean, talking about actors who can take something and really just play it so sincerely. David is so perfect at it. That's why he's so funny in all of the movies that you see him in, is because he knows how to be the character, not make a joke out of it. And the funniness just comes. And so I think that, you know, those types of comedic actors often do really great in these type of dramatic roles. And so, you know, we needed someone who knew that we knew this character would be in good hands with them, because it is ridiculous. There's some aspects of it that it's not funny, but it's strange. And David is perfect at that. And so I think he really rode that line just kind of perfectly. And yeah, I think we liked casting against type too, because you don't get to see him in super dark roles, I don't think.
Yeah, and he was ready to go there. He had all the right questions, he had all the right considerations, and really went into it with so much deliberation and thoughtfulness, and put something out there that was just 100% talent and well thought out and well executed. I mean, he was just amazing to work with.
And he's from Southern Missouri, so I mean, he kind of knew this type of person, you know, like we could tell, okay, he knows who this is, you know, so it's just, we had total trust with him.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Well, and that's great, because I mean, and he is the person who articulates the title of the film. I mean, which I really love the way you found a way to sort of like take that myth and like find a way, like, well, if this was an evangelical myth, how would it turn out? Because the thing I love about Greek and Roman mythology is the way that it, you know, that they basically understand that like these gods are allegories, and like they're used to explain like the vicissitudes of human behavior. So in this instance, like you always imagine there was someone who's just like, yeah, our son seems kind of down lately. What's wrong? And just like, well, one of his friends made a new friend and was swept away by a daddy of means. And it's just like, Ganymede and Zeus.
Yeah, absolutely.
I dig the way you sort of approach that, and it's great. It's going back to your whole concept of like taking this situation and making it a very personal and specific horror thing, which is it's a great film. One of the things that I find really interesting is the way that across the board, every environment, with the exception of two, is suffused with potential violence, and in some cases, it's not potential; it is actualized violence. But the two that aren't are the guidance counselor's office and Kyle's home. Like these two very specific oases away from like just this like at every moment just the potential for just unbridled chaos and violence to erupt. And I was just sort of like, is that something that you approached from the script, or is that as you were making it just like we need to have a space where the audience can feel safe for a few minutes?
Such a good question and well thought. Yeah, I appreciate your perspective on it. What would you say, Colby? I mean, I feel like
I think it goes to show that those two spaces do live right next door to each other in the South. It is a reality that there are people who, as you're suggesting, the viewers need those safe spaces to go into. There are people in the real world who need those safe spaces to go to. And part of showing those realities is to say that like there is this version of the South that exists right next door to the version that sometimes is like, caricaturized in the press. And that's very real too. There is that version of the South that is backwards and hard to pull into the 21st century on some issues, particularly queer issues. But there also is a version of the South that is progressive. Andy Beshear is the governor of Kentucky. There are oftentimes a Democrat as the governor of Virginia. It's like there are these dichotomies that play out a little bit sharper in the South and in rural areas in general, not just the South. This really is a rural urban divide. And so we just wanted to show that those worlds exist next to each other.
Definitely.
Right on. I want to give special props. The actress who plays the guidance counselor has my favorite line of the film, which is just when you get home, Google Liberace. That's great. And because it's so weird for me, I'm 48, but like a lot of my criticism and a lot of like doing film introductions and talking to younger audiences, I'm like having to like re-coordinate my references so that we're all on the same page.
Honestly, yeah.
And nothing makes me feel so old as something like that. I mean, just like, oh, you don't know who Liberace is. I'm just like, allow me to crumble into dust like an Indiana Jones villain. It's the thing about this film that really, really sneaks up on you, I think, is just how utterly plausible the way that weak-minded people will lean on easy explanations that absolve them of responsibility. And it's just like, we're aware of that. Like you don't, it doesn't really matter where you live. You're just conscious of that on a daily basis, politically and everything. And it's just, but this really gets at that and how it's like a lot of times, sometimes it's not even really evil. It's just easier. It's just easier to come up with this system where, like, oh, well, it's not my fault and everything is against me. But this is it's just like it's sort of like picking and choosing your own moral code based on what's easier. And this film gets at that, but it doesn't do it in an easy way. Like you have to make the journey with it. And I was just sort of like, how do you set out to make a morally complex journey out of your film? I mean, it's just like ostensibly that's something that everybody wants to do is have like get a certain degree of moral complexity, but like pulling it off is a whole other thing. Like, was that something that like, as you were making this on a daily basis, when you would look at dailies or something, you're just like, is it, we can adjust here, or maybe, or was there any like rewriting during the course of it? Or did you pretty much go straight through with the script as written? I'm talking a lot because I'm throwing these thoughts at you and I'm expecting you to make sense of them.
We got you.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. And I think that the answer is that I think even from the script phase, Sam and I talked a lot about We want each of these characters to be a portal for somebody to come to this issue through. And so we even said, even if you're Big Lee, the father character, like even if you're coming to it from his perspective, if you can hop into his little ride of this and like maybe even just be exposed to the story, even if you agree with him, one of the most reprehensible viewpoints in the film, then like you've been able to make it through the film feeling like there's someone you can view this through. And so if we get you to stay, maybe you're going to come away feeling a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And so that goes for each character.
Yeah, especially when there are actual things in their life that they're not fully looking at and trying to, like you said, have this alternate viewpoint for or conspiracy created for, rather than accept the full scary thing, which is sometimes just facing the truth and facing the facts. And I think a lot of the characters in this film are struggling with hitting the full truth of something. And if you're a viewer and seeing it, like Colby was saying, from a perspective that you relate to, maybe you're going to be able to see your own things a little differently by seeing someone that you feel like looks like you or is acting like you play out a scenario in a way that you have been maybe afraid to, whether that's coming out or navigating someone coming out in a world of unacceptance. There's just a lot of ways that it gives people an opportunity to see it differently and also not feel alone. And if they're feeling like they're struggling to figure out how to navigate something tied to queer identity.
Mm-hmm. And that's not to give credence to those type of destructive viewpoints that like Big Lee holds. I mean, Big Lee does not end up in a good place at the end of this film. And in my opinion, you know, he's living a lie completely, which, you know, is kind of ironic considering he's trying to force his son to live a lie. Meanwhile, he's, you know, doing his own version of that, you know, so it's, yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So now here's a question, both about the characters in the film and in the real world, because it's something that like you see in closed systems, you know, whether it's evangelical stuff, whether it's Catholic Church, whether it's the Mormons, whether it's Scientology, you know, is it that people can't recognize actual predators or that they won't?
I mean, I think it can vary depending on where you're at, but I think that I grew up Catholic, and I do remember I was about 13 when there was a whole entire all the news that was coming out about different priests who were predatorial and molesting a lot of people that were in the church, depending on where you were at. And I am lucky that I was not in an environment where that ended up being something where I fell victim to, but it is one of those things that I did witness in the system of the church itself, not just the church I went to, but the greater totality of it, that there was this kind of dancing around this really dangerous fact about what was happening in the culture of the religion. And I think that there is a lot of people out there who just really want to just turn a blind eye to stuff and hope it doesn't affect them in some adverse way. And then when it blows up in their face of their family or what have you, sometimes that can be a consequence to, you know, not heeding the warning of what might be the environment you're in. And that's not to say that Catholicism means that you are susceptible to that at all in all instances, but just no matter what, if there are things about a system that you're in that have some things that are cause for concern and people are talking about it, it's worth paying attention and starting to question what your choices are for why your reasons are going through this religion, and what are the benefits and what are the things you have to look out for, you know? And that's to say that religion can be a really helpful vehicle for people. I think that spirituality and faith are a very beneficial component to those who are able to embrace it for whatever way, shape, or mean it benefits them. But you also have to look through the totality of it and what is power in these systems and what is a thing that you're getting out of it from a spiritual perspective, and finding those balances between what is the spiritual and what is the power dynamic is something I think is often the thing people just kind of unfortunately are ignorant to.
Yeah. And to directly answer your question, I think some people won't and some people can't. And the people that won't are the reason that some people can't. Oftentimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And to like delve even further into the difficult realm, it's not that difficult, but it's just something. It's like the question that the end of the film leaves with me, and it's like, and first off, I love the fact that Bobby has a place at the table at the very end, because like, yeah, he's an asshole with bad social skills, but it's just like you go on the gentleman apps and like there's a lot of guys like Bobby who are just like, just be quiet about it, and it's like, so there is a place at the table for that. But the really difficult question about this film, and I wanted to ask y'all since you made it, um, does the pastor deserve any sympathy whatsoever? I mean, like, he's a horrible person. He's a predator. Like, he's literally exploiting, youth and decency, for like very small-minded people. But is it also like, is this his survival mechanism? Like, was this the way he found to like get by? And I was just like, I don't know. I don't that like the like Keckner is so good in it that you're just like, no, fuck that guy. Like, run him out of the street into the swamp, let the opossums take care of it or whatever. But at the same time, I'm just like, there's that question. Is it just like, in a zero tolerance situation for queer identities, like how do you react to this? So like, there's not an easy answer for me as a viewer. So I'm going to throw that at y'all as the filmmakers.
Yeah, well, in short, I think it's a warning. It says, if you don't address these things, look at what you could become. You're looking down the future at what Lee's future could be if he were to continue to bury this down. Like, when you bury this type of monster, or not monster, but when you bury your identity and refuse to face it, what kind of monster does it turn into? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the question that is left when David at the end of the film, or Pastor Royer at the end of the film, is still out there. It's like that moment when, Jamie Lee looks out the window and Michael Myers is gone. He's still out there. And so at the end, it's a warning to say, like, these people can do these things and then they can still be out there.
Yeah. And in fact, I would say that Pastor Royer represents, regardless of whether he's good or bad, he is a representative of a whole system that can have corrupt behavior involved in it. And he was born into it. He was raised in it. He cultivated a future of it. And the film in many ways is about trying to break those systems and break those forms for what maybe was the traditional way a certain institution might have done something, or a certain perspective might have been, and find a way to do it differently. And there have to sometimes be catalysts to this, and people who are actually awake outside of it. And unfortunately, I think that Pastor Royer had his own demons that also have been ones he had the responsibility to work through in some ways, but also ultimately was just born into in a lot of ways. And I think that Pastor David himself looked at Pastor Royer as, why would this person do this, and what are the things that would make him make these choices? And I think those were really important things for us to also witness as we saw this character develop. So.
Yeah, I mean, quote unquote, so-called ex-gays are out there, and they're very real, and they have done a lot of damage to people. And do I also feel like horrible that they, as gay people, have chosen to do that, or queer people have chosen to do that? I do. I feel sorry for them. It doesn't excuse the harm that they have done and that they continue to do. And so it's, my personal feeling that stuff has to be called out. And we say, this is not okay. And you should just be yourself. Stop doing this.
Yeah, if Lee had not broken through, like, I see his future as Milo Yiannopoulos. There's
oh geez,
sure. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I went there, but
yeah, no, I mean, it's funny. I think sometimes I actively forget that name, and then I'm like, oh, there he is.
Yeah,
he pops up in like all the random times.
He is the gay boogeyman right now.
Yeah,
he's just like lurking out there, and like it's sort of like, it's like Candyman. Like, you don't want to say his name too many times because it gives him power. But
yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I just and also last thing, I just y'all have got a very special film here, and I feel like it could be used as not just as like, a fun night at the movies, but like as an educational tool, because you've got it's not just the fact that it delivers the scares, but there's a graciousness to this that like we can understand Lee's process and like what it takes to get there, and like Kyle is like like he puts up with an inordinate amount of shit, and he does it with style, and he does it in like a smart and funny way. And sometimes that is the gay ability to survive, is to do it stylish and do it funny. But it's like these are great performances that are, like I said, it's nobody's breaking the continuum. It all feels relatable, and I'm hoping that this film in its future life, can help make situations better for people.
Yeah, we appreciate you saying that, and we hope so too. I mean, I think we tried to make the movie we would have wanted to see as gay kids that were closeted. I know for myself, when I was in my early 20s and late teens, there was not a lot of options on Netflix for LGBTQ films. And the ones that I did watch, I held on to, and those really helped me come out. And even if it's someone who's not going through the process of coming out, but for anyone to have a perspective that is LGBTQ in any way in film, I think is a really powerful tool for a world that often isn't given a lot of platforms for LGBTQ films to thrive and create a message in the world. So we're really glad and honored that this film is coming out, and that it's something that hopefully will be able to create ripple effect for people who need to have some sort of aha moment in any way, or see things differently, or just think about things a certain way. And that's not saying that we want them to think specifically one way or the other, but just to think about it. That's all I want to say.
Yeah, and Sam said this all the time through many phases of making this film, and I think it gets us through a lot. Is like our hope is that there's some young gay or queer person, like under their sheet or under their like blanket, watching this on their phone with headphones in, and like even if they are feeling unsure about themselves, they know like, okay, here's a future out there for me, or like I'm feeling seen by this, and I think we both and many queer people will empathize with that moment of like what it was like to see yourself on film or to see something that resonated with you. And that's our ultimate hope. And so I think you hit the nail on the head with it.
Yeah.
Well, Sam, Colby, thank you so much for being part of this discussion. Thank you for letting us show your film. And to everyone at home, please keep watching stuff. That's what the Chattanooga Film Festival does. And we're pleased to invade your electronic transmission networks. So I hope you continue seeing good stuff.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Chattanooga Film Festival as well. We're just so thrilled and honored to be part of this. It's just been awesome. So